Welcome back to Crime Time Inc.
Yeah, we've got Richard Ramirez for you today.
Yeah, the Night Stalker.
Terrorized California in the 80s.
Absolutely, and what we have is quite a bit of information on him: court transcripts, articles, even some excerpts from a death row interview.
Hmm.
So this should be a pretty comprehensive look.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a fascinating one just from what I've seen so far.
Definitely, and I guess to start with a case like this, we kind of have to look at his early life to see, maybe where it all began.
Yeah, I think that's key. Obviously, not excusing any of his actions, but I think to fully understand him, we got to start at the beginning.
Absolutely. So let's rewind a bit. He was born in El Paso, Texas in 1960.
Right.
What was his childhood like?
Well, his childhood was troubled, to say the least.
Okay.
Exposed to violence pretty much from the get-go.
Right.
Accounts of his cousin Miguel, he was a Vietnam War veteran.
Yeah.
Posting about and showing Richard photos of women he'd assaulted and killed during the war.
That's horrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, to be exposed to that at such a young age.
Yeah. You can only speculate how that would affect a young mind.
Right.
But it gets worse. When Richard was 13, he actually witnessed Miguel murder his wife.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, talk about a turning point, right?
Absolutely. I mean, to witness something like that at 13,
yeah,
it's going to change your perception of everything.
They're going to warp your worldview somehow. And unsurprisingly, he started getting into some trouble as a teenager.
Yeah, but it seems like his criminal activity really escalated once he moved to California.
Yeah. California seems to be a turning point for him.
Right.
The sources we have suggest that his drug addiction, coupled with his fascination with Satanism, really fueled his descent into more serious and violent crimes.
Right. And this is where we see the birth of the Night Stalker in 1984 with the murder of 79-year-old Jenny Vinkow in Glassell Park. So this is the start of a very terrifying period for Californians. He embarks on a series of home invasions, murders, rapes, burglaries, and it seems like he's targeting victims at random.
Yeah, and that's partly what made him so terrifying, right? Unlike a lot of serial killers who target specific victims,
right,
he seemed to prey on anyone and everyone.
So it created this climate of fear, unlike anything I think people had really experienced.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you imagine going to bed each night not knowing if you or your loved ones are going to be his next target?
It's like a real-life boogeyman.
It is. It's just this phantom that could strike anywhere at any time.
Right. And to make things even more terrifying, he would leave behind satanic symbols at his crime scenes.
Yeah, like he would demand his victims to swear to Satan and even draw pentagrams.
Right. It's like he's trying to invoke something evil.
Right. It was about creating this ritualistic horror.
Yeah.
Something almost supernatural.
Absolutely. And it worked. He became this media sensation, this figure of dread and fascination.
And beyond the headlines and the sensationalism, there were real victims.
Right.
Real lives shattered by his brutality.
And we have to talk about the brutality of his crimes.
Right.
He didn't just kill his victims. He often tortured them, mutilated them.
The level of sadism is just disturbing.
It really is. And some cases stand out. The murders of Vincent and Maxine Zazzara.
Yeah.
After shooting Vincent, he mutilated Maxine's body.
That's awful.
It's just pure sadism.
It is. And another case that stands out is the attack on 16-year-old Whitney Bennett. He bludgeoned her with a tire iron and tried to strangle her.
Right.
She survived. It was a miracle that she did.
It really is.
And we can't forget the case of Elias and Sakina Abawath. He shot Elias in the head and then raped Sakina in front of their 3-year-old son.
God.
These cases, along with so many others, just paint a truly horrifying picture of his reign of terror. So given the nature of his crimes, how was he able to evade capture for so long? What were the police doing to stop him?
Well, you got to remember, this is before DNA profiling was widely used.
Right.
And his victims were seemingly random, and his crimes spanned multiple jurisdictions, so it was really hard to establish a clear pattern.
So it sounds like a logistical nightmare.
Oh, it was.
Multiple police departments, different jurisdictions, all trying to piece together this puzzle without having a clear picture.
Exactly. And it wasn't until a task force was formed, led by detectives Frank Salerno and Gil Carrillo, that things started to come together. They focused on physical evidence, like a specific avious sneaker footprint that kept appearing at crime scenes.
Right, so that footprint became a crucial piece of evidence.
Yeah, it was a big breakthrough.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just police work that ultimately led to his capture.
Right.
The public played a vital role.
Right.
Once his mugshot was released,
Yeah.
it was only a matter of time.
It's amazing how quickly it happened. I mean, a group of residents in East Los Angeles, they spotted him, chased him down, and held him until the police arrived.
Talk about vigilante justice.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to the level of fear and anger that he had instilled in the community.
Yeah, they were terrified and determined to stop him.
Absolutely.
So
his capture marked the end of his reign of terror.
right.
But it was just the beginning of another chapter.
His trial.
Exactly.
And that's where things get really interesting.
It was a spectacle, wasn't it?
It was a media frenzy fueled by this public fascination with Ramirez.
Yeah, and his dark charisma.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that people were drawn to him, idolized him,
Right.
even after all these horrific acts.
It is a bit baffling.
I think it speaks to the dark side of human nature.
The complexities of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the trial itself was lengthy.
But in the end, the evidence was just overwhelming.
It was. And he was found guilty of 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. In 1989, he was sentenced to death in California's gas chamber.
Right.
So justice was served. But even though he was behind bars, his story is far from over.
Oh, yeah. That's true. You know, thinking about the trial, I think it also revealed some pretty big issues within the justice system.
Oh, for sure, particularly with a case of this magnitude. I mean, the fact that his crimes spanned multiple jurisdictions, it just created a huge logistical challenge for law enforcement.
Absolutely, yeah. You see it in the court documents and articles, communication breakdowns, conflicting priorities between different agencies.
Right.
Really hindered the early stages of the investigation.
And it makes you think how many lives could have been saved if there was just more of a coordinated effort,
Yeah.
right from the get-go.
It's a tough question to think about, but yeah, it's a reminder that we need better collaboration, especially in cases that cross geographical boundaries.
Right.
Even today, that's relevant, especially with crimes that cross state lines or international borders.
Absolutely. And then you have this whole media frenzy surrounding the trial.
Oh, yeah, it was insane.
It was like nothing I'd ever seen before or since.
I mean, Ramirez was front-page news for months.
It was relentless.
And the public just couldn't get enough.
It's fascinating how the media not only reported the facts, but they kind of actively shaped the narrative.
Oh, for sure. They always highlighted the most shocking aspects.
Right.
And that's what sells, right?
Sensationalism at its finest.
Exactly. And Ramirez, with the dark persona and the satanic elements.
Oh, he was the perfect subject.
He was tailor-made for this type of coverage.
And it makes you wonder what effect it had on him,
Right. Did it feed his ego?
Did it make him feel more powerful?
Yeah, and you see it in the courtroom. He's playing to the cameras, holding up his hand with the pentagram on it.
Yeah, it's like a deliberate provocation.
Absolutely. He was manipulating the media, using it to his advantage.
Wow.
It's a scary thought.
For sure. But let's shift our focus back to the aftermath of his capture. I mean, the city could breathe a sigh of relief, but the scars ran deep.
Of course, the trauma inflicted on his victims and their families, it was immense. The sense of security was just shattered for so many.
Absolutely.
And the psychological impact, that lingers even after he's behind bars.
Right. And then there's a question of what would become of this man who had terrorized an entire state.
Right. What is justice in a case like this?
And the trial and sentencing was a long and arduous process, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. The prosecution, they were determined to get justice for the victims.
Yeah.
And the defense was exploring every legal avenue, to save their client's life.
Right. And it's all there. The court transcripts, we see the prosecution presenting all this evidence, the survivor testimonies, the forensic analysis, and then you have the defense challenging the validity of the evidence, trying to portray Ramirez as a product of his troubled past.
Right. You see both sides really fighting hard, for their goals. And ultimately, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts.
They did. In 1989, Richard Ramirez was sentenced to death.
Justice served.
But the question remained, is this truly the end of the Night Stalker?
I mean, even behind bars, he continued to exert this strange hold over people.
Oh, it's strange, isn't it?
He received fan mail marriage proposals from people captivated by his darkness.
It's baffling how someone who committed such horrific acts could still garner admiration.
It's disturbing.
It is.
But it's this fascination with the dark side of human nature.
Yeah, so while Ramirez's physical reign of terror ended with his capture, His story continued to unfold in those years he spent on death row.
Right, he became the subject of books, documentaries, even fictionalized accounts.
His case just continued to fascinate and horrify.
It did, and, it prompts these ongoing debates about the nature of evil, the
Yeah.
role of the media,
Yeah.
how the justice system responds to cases like this.
It's as if his story has become part of the fabric of, American culture.
Right.
A cautionary tale that we're still talking about today.
Absolutely, a reminder that even when justice is served, the echoes of these acts can last for generations.
So with Ramirez behind bars awaiting his fate, let's focus a little bit on the trial itself and some of the key details that emerged. What were some of the insights we gained into his methods and his psychology?
Well, one thing that jumps out from the transcripts is how meticulous he was in wiping down crime scenes to get rid of his fingerprints.
That suggests premeditation.
It does a certain level of awareness that you don't always see.
Right, like a level of criminal sophistication.
Exactly. He wasn't just some mindless brute.
Right.
It was calculating at least to some degree.
Then there are these instances where he slips up like the avia footprint.
Right.
It's interesting.
It's a contradiction, isn't it?
It is.
Maybe it was about control.
Okay.
He had control over his victims, the environment, maybe even the investigation in a way.
Okay.
Leaving behind a clue like that could be seen as a taunt to the authorities.
That's an interesting point. It adds another layer to his already complex psychology.
Right. And speaking of psychology,
Yeah.
the experts at the trial painted a pretty disturbing picture of his mental state.
What do they say?
Well, they described him as having classic traits of a narcissistic sociopath, someone with an inflated sense of self-importance and a complete lack of empathy.
And they pointed to his childhood trauma, his exposure to violence, his fascination with Satanism as contributing factors to his worldview.
Right. It really shows how early experiences can shape a person, especially when those experiences are filled with violence and a lack of healthy emotional development.
Right. But it's important to remember that not everyone who experiences trauma or, explores dark ideologies becomes a serial killer.
Absolutely. There's a lot more at play here, but I think these insights from the experts give us a valuable window into his mind. They help us understand these potential pathways that can lead to this type of behavior.
Definitely. Speaking of getting inside his mind, we have the death row interview, which gives us this fascinating but unsettling perspective. But of course, we have to approach his words carefully, knowing that he was a master manipulator.
Absolutely. He was good at twisting things to fit his narrative. And in this interview, he seems to almost revel in the attention, boasting about his crimes and this supposed connection to Satan.
It's disturbing how he showed no remorse for his actions.
Not at all.
Like he viewed himself as some sort of anti-hero reveling in the infamy.
He created this world where his actions were justified, even glorified.
It's a scary thought.
It is.
But even amidst all this darkness, there are glimmers of hope and resilience.
Of course.
I mean, the survivors who shared their stories during the trial, they showed incredible courage.
They did amazing strength in the face of unimaginable trauma.
Their willingness to confront their attacker, to reclaim their voices, it's a testament to the human spirit.
Yeah, the power to heal, find meaning even in the darkest of times.
And we can't forget the dedication of the law enforcement officials who worked so tirelessly to bring him to justice.
Right. They represent the best of humanity.
They do, protecting others from harm.
And the families of the victims. They had to endure the unimaginable, the pain of loss compounded by this relentless media scrutiny.
It's hard to even fathom.
Their strength and their dignity in the face of such grief. It's truly inspiring.
It is. They turned their pain into a force for good.
Yeah.
Advocating for victims' rights, working to ensure that their loved ones' memories are honored.
Beautiful. I think that's a good place to leave it.
Tune in tomorrow to hear Simon and Tom's weekly review, where they will discuss and dissect this and all the other cases from this week's Crime Time Inc. And we will be back on Monday to have a look at some Australian true crime cases to coincide with Simon's trip to Australia.